Quinn Hawkins tugged his hat lower against the harsh Colorado sun as he watched the cattle drive wind its way toward Timber Creek. At 25, he was younger than most trail bosses, but 4 years of driving cattle had aged his spirit well beyond his years. His clean-shaven face and alert blue eyes gave him a youthful appearance that sometimes made the older hands question his authority, but none could deny his skill with horses or his calm hand during a stampede. "The frontier's no place for sentiment," Quinn muttered to himself, a mantra he'd adopted after watching too many good men lose themselves to whiskey and memories. The West demanded practicality above all else. Attachments only gave a man something to lose. He'd learned that lesson watching his father drink himself to death after his mother passed from fever, leaving behind nothing but debts and a ranch they couldn't keep. A shout from the back of the herd pulled his attention. Young Billy, barely 17 and on his first cattle drive, was struggling to keep a few steers from breaking away. Quinn spurred his palomino forward, expertly cutting off the wayward cattle and guiding them back to the herd with practiced ease. "Keep your eyes open, Billy," Quinn called as he circled back. "Daydreaming gets men killed out here." The boy nodded, face flushed with embarrassment. "Sorry, boss, won't happen again." Quinn didn't respond, simply touched the brim of his hat and rode ahead. The truth was, he envied the boy's ability to still get lost in thoughts and dreams. Quinn's own mind stayed firmly rooted in practicalities: water sources, grazing land, potential threats. There was no room for anything else. As the afternoon sun began its descent, the distant rooftops of Timber Creek appeared on the horizon. The small ranching town had sprung up alongside the railroad, becoming a hub for cattle shipments eastward. Quinn had passed through twice before and found it unremarkable except for its relatively peaceful saloon and fair cattle prices. "We'll make camp at Cottonwood Creek tonight," Quinn announced to his trail cook, Jasper. "Head into town tomorrow once the herd's settled." "Good choice," Jasper nodded, his white beard bobbing. "That creek's got the sweetest water in 3 counties. Might catch some trout for supper too." Quinn nodded absently, his eyes scanning the horizon for the familiar line of cottonwoods that marked their intended campsite. Something seemed different about the landscape, a thin column of smoke rising where there should be none. "Someone's camped at our spot," Quinn observed, a frown creasing his brow. Strangers meant potential trouble, especially this close to town. "Want me to ride ahead?" offered Mac, his most experienced hand. "No, I'll check it myself, keep the herd moving steady." Quinn urged his horse forward, one hand resting casually on his revolver. As he approached the creek, he made out a single wagon partially hidden among the trees. A small campfire burned nearby, and a slender figure moved around it, seemingly unaware of his approach. As he drew closer, Quinn realized the figure was a young woman, and she was alone, a rare and dangerous situation in these parts. She wore a simple blue dress with a white apron, her honey blonde hair tied back in a practical braid that fell just past her shoulders. When she turned at the sound of his horse, Quinn was struck by the clarity of her green eyes and the wariness that immediately filled them at the sight of him. "Afternoon, ma'am," he called, stopping his horse at a respectful distance and removing his hat. "Quinn Hawkins, I'm trail boss for the cattle drive heading this way." The woman straightened, brushing flour from her hands onto her apron. "Hannah Keller," she replied, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "Is there a problem, Mr. Hawkins?" "No problem, Miss Keller. Just wanted to let you know we'll be bringing about 800 head of cattle through here shortly. We typically camp at this spot." Hannah nodded, glancing at her small camp. "I see, I'm only passing through myself. Headed to Timber Creek to meet my uncle." Something in her tone caught Quinn's attention, a slight hesitation perhaps. He studied her more carefully. She looked to be about 20, with delicate features that seemed out of place in the rugged landscape. Her wagon was small but well-maintained, though Quinn noted it lacked the usual provisions for long-distance travel. "Traveling alone?" he asked, unable to keep the concern from his voice. "My driver took ill in Denver," she explained, lifting her chin slightly. "I decided to continue on my own rather than wait. It's only 30 miles to Timber Creek." Quinn tried not to show his alarm. A woman traveling alone was practically an invitation for trouble. Already he could imagine the reaction of some of his men, the younger, more reckless ones, when they spotted her. Miss Keller, I don't mean to alarm you, but that was a dangerous decision. These parts aren't safe for unaccompanied women. Her expression hardened. I'm perfectly capable of handling myself, Mr. Hawkins. I have my father's revolver and know how to use it. Despite her brave words, Quinn noticed the slight tremble in her hand as she gestured toward the wagon where, presumably, the weapon was stored. Too far to reach if trouble came calling. I don't doubt your courage, Quinn replied carefully, but there are men on the trail who haven't seen a woman in months. I can't guarantee they'll all behave civilly. Hannah's confidence wavered visibly, and she glanced toward the distant dust cloud that marked the approaching herd. Quinn sighed, already regretting what he was about to offer. Entanglements meant complications, and complications on a cattle drive were dangerous, but his conscience wouldn't allow him to leave her unprotected. You're welcome to travel alongside us to Timber Creek, he said. We'll be there by mid-morning tomorrow. You'll have our protection, and in return, perhaps you might help Jasper with the evening meal. He's been cooking the same 3 dishes for weeks now. Relief flashed across Hannah's face before she composed herself. That seems a fair arrangement, Mr. Hawkins, thank you. As Quinn rode back to inform his men, he couldn't shake a sense of unease. Hannah Keller's story had holes in it. No experienced traveler would attempt that journey alone, and her wagon wasn't properly outfitted for frontier travel. But whatever her secrets, they were hers to keep. His responsibility was to deliver his herd, not to solve the mysteries of every stranger he encountered on the trail. What Quinn couldn't have known was how completely that chance meeting would upend the careful, detached life he'd constructed for himself, or that the small carved wooden heart he would discover in her possession would lead him down a path from which there would be no turning back. The cattle drive's arrival at the Cottonwood Creek campsite transformed the peaceful setting into a buzz of activity. Cowboys expertly guided the herd to water in small groups while others set up camp. Hannah found herself observing with fascination as the men worked with practiced efficiency, each knowing his role without needing direction. Quinn dismounted near her wagon, issuing orders before approaching. Up close, Hannah noticed details she'd missed earlier: the sunlightened streaks in his brown hair, the way one corner of his mouth turned up slightly when he spoke, the lean strength in his movements. My men know you're under our protection, he said directly, but I'd still advise staying close to the chuck wagon. Jasper's looking forward to having help with supper. Hannah nodded. Of course, I'm grateful for your assistance. As she walked with Quinn toward the chuck wagon, she felt the curious stares of the cowboys. Most tipped their hats respectfully, though a few lingered too long in their assessment. She straightened her shoulders, determined not to appear intimidated. Jasper proved to be a gruff but kindly man in his 60s, his leathered face breaking into a genuine smile when Quinn introduced Hannah. Well now, a proper lady to help with the cookin'. These boys might finally get a meal that doesn't taste like saddle leather, Jasper exclaimed, showing her his cooking setup. I'm afraid my cooking skills are rather basic, Hannah admitted. But I'm happy to help however I can. Quinn left them to their preparations, and Hannah found herself relaxing as she assisted Jasper. The trail cook shared stories of past cattle drives while she peeled potatoes and prepared biscuit dough. She felt useful for the first time in weeks, and the physical work helped quiet her anxious thoughts about what awaited her in Timber Creek. As the sun began to set, the smell of beef stew and fresh biscuits drew the cowboys to the chuck wagon. Hannah served alongside Jasper, receiving appreciative nods and polite thanks from most of the men. When Quinn approached for his portion, their eyes met briefly, and something in his measured gaze made her heart quicken unexpectedly. The men appreciate the fresh biscuits, Miss Keller, he said quietly. It's been a while since they've had such comforts. It's the least I can do, she replied, suddenly conscious of a flour smudge on her cheek. She resisted the urge to wipe it away, not wanting to draw attention to it. To her surprise, Quinn reached out slowly, giving her time to step back and brush the flour from her face with his thumb. The gesture was brief but gentle, and his hand retreated quickly. Hazard of baking, he said, his tone unchanged though something flickered in his eyes. He nodded his thanks for the food and moved away to sit with his foreman. Hannah finished serving the men, her cheeks still warm where his fingers had touched it. She chided herself for the reaction. It had been a simple, practical gesture, nothing more. Yet she found herself sneaking glances at him as he ate apart from the other men, his posture alert even in rest, his attention moving between his food and the herd. After the meal, as the men gathered around the fire, Quinn approached her again. "Some of the men will be singing later," he said. "You're welcome to join us by the fire if you'd like." "Thank you, I might," Hannah replied, though she had already decided to retire to her wagon. The day's events had left her exhausted, and tomorrow would bring its own challenges. As she prepared for sleep in her wagon, the sounds of harmonica music and low singing drifted through the canvas. The melancholy tune spoke of homes left behind and loves lost to distance, sentiments that resonated painfully with her own circumstances. Hannah reached beneath her thin mattress and withdrew a small wooden box. Inside lay her most precious possession, a small heart carved from pine, no larger than a silver dollar with delicate wildflowers etched into its surface. She ran her finger over the smooth wood, tracing the familiar pattern. It was her talisman, her reminder of purpose. Carefully, she returned it to its hiding place and lay down, listening to the cowboy's songs until sleep finally claimed her. Morning came too quickly, announced by Jasper's call for breakfast and the sounds of the camp stirring to life. Hannah dressed quickly and emerged to help with the morning meal. The cowboys moved with quiet efficiency in the pre-dawn light, preparing to move the herd for the final stretch to Timber Creek. Quinn appeared beside her as she poured coffee for the men. "We'll reach town by mid-morning," he said. "Is someone meeting you there?" The question carried no suspicion, only practical concern, but Hannah felt her guard rise nonetheless. "My uncle should be there, yes, he owns the mercantile." Quinn nodded, accepting her answer without comment. "We'll escort you directly to the store then." "That's very kind but unnecessary," Hannah replied quickly. "Once we reach town, I'm sure I'll be fine on my own." Something in her tone must have revealed more than she intended, for Quinn studied her face a moment longer than comfortable before responding. "As you wish, Miss Keller." As the camp broke down around them, Hannah couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret at her abruptness. Quinn Hawkins had shown her nothing but courtesy, yet she continued to hold him at arm's length as she did everyone since leaving home. The journey to Timber Creek passed without incident. Hannah drove her wagon alongside the chuck wagon, occasionally exchanging words with Jasper or nodding to the cowboys who rode nearby. Quinn remained at the head of the herd, a distant figure silhouetted against the morning sky. As the town came into view, Hannah's apprehension grew. Timber Creek was smaller than she'd imagined, a single main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church steeple rising at one end, stockyards visible at the other. It was nothing like her home in Pennsylvania, yet it represented both sanctuary and uncertainty. Quinn rode back to her wagon as they approached the edge of town. "We'll be heading straight to the stockyards," he said. "The mercantile should be just past the hotel on the main street. Will you be all right from here?" Hannah nodded, suddenly reluctant to part ways. "Yes, thank you for your protection, Mr. Hawkins. I wish you safe travels." He touched his hat brim. "Good luck, Miss Keller." As he turned to ride away, Hannah impulsively called after him, "Mr. Hawkins." He looked back, waiting. Perhaps I'll see you in town before you leave." The barest hint of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps you will." With that, he rejoined his men, and Hannah urged her horses forward into Timber Creek, her future awaiting. The Timber Creek stockyards hummed with activity as Quinn oversaw the counting and transfer of his herd. The cattle buyer, a portly man named Wilson, seemed fair in his assessment, and the price offered matched Quinn's expectations. By early afternoon, the paperwork was complete, and Quinn distributed the promised wages to his men. 2 days rest before we head back," he announced to the gathered cowboys. "Be at the livery at dawn on Thursday. And try to stay out of trouble," he added, knowing the warning would fall on deaf ears for some. As the men dispersed toward the saloon, Quinn headed to the bank to deposit the cattle payment. His thoughts, however, kept drifting to Hannah Keller and her mysterious journey. There was no mercantile owner in Timber Creek named Keller. Quinn knew most of the business owners by reputation, if not personally. Had she lied about her destination? And if so, why? It wasn't his concern, Quinn reminded himself firmly. She was safely delivered to town and his responsibility ended there. Yet as he finished his banking business and stepped back onto the dusty main street, he found himself scanning the boardwalks for a glimpse of honey-blonde hair and a blue dress. Instead, his attention was caught by a commotion outside the Silver Dollar Saloon. Two men were engaged in a heated argument, one of them Billy, his young wrangler. Quinn sighed and headed toward them, recognizing the other man as Jack Ransom, a local troublemaker with a reputation for cheating at cards. "You calling me a cheat, boy?" Ransom was saying, his hand hovering near his holster. Billy, clearly out of his depth but too proud to back down, stood his ground. "I'm saying no man draws four aces honest, especially when I saw you palm that card." Quinn stepped between them before Ransom could respond. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Billy, back off now." "But boss, he—" Now, Quinn repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Billy reluctantly stepped back, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Quinn turned to Ransom. "Jack, whatever happened inside stays inside. My boys had too much whiskey and too little sense. No harm done." Ransom's eyes narrowed. "Your pup accused me of cheating, Hawkins. That ain't something I let slide." "You'll let it slide today," Quinn replied evenly, "unless you want Sheriff Mills asking questions about those horses that disappeared from the Peterson ranch last month." It was a shot in the dark. Quinn had only heard rumors about Ransom's involvement, but the flash of alarm in the man's eyes confirmed his suspicions. "Keep your pup on a shorter leash," Ransom growled, backing away. "Next time I won't be so forgiving." As Ransom retreated into the saloon, Quinn grabbed Billy's arm and steered him down the street. "What the hell were you thinking? That man's killed 3 men that I know of. He was cheating, boss, taking money from Davis and Jenkins. And that's worth dying over. You've got more courage than sense, Billy." Quinn released the young cowboy's arm. "Go get some coffee and sober up. Stay away from the Silver Dollar while Ransom's in town." Billy nodded sullenly and shuffled toward the hotel restaurant. Quinn watched him go, shaking his head. The boy reminded him too much of himself at that age, quick to anger and slower to think. As Quinn turned to continue down the street, he spotted a familiar figure exiting the general store. Hannah was engaged in conversation with the store owner, Mr. Fletcher, her expression troubled. She clutched a piece of paper in her hand, which she folded carefully and tucked into her pocket before noticing Quinn. Their eyes met across the street, and after a moment's hesitation, Hannah crossed to meet him. "Mr. Hawkins," she greeted him, her composure noticeably forced. "I was hoping I might run into you." "Miss Keller," Quinn replied with a nod. "Did you find your uncle?" A flicker of distress crossed her face before she managed a smile. "No, I'm afraid there's been some confusion. It seems my uncle sold his business and moved on some months ago. Mr. Fletcher was just informing me." Quinn studied her carefully. The news clearly wasn't a surprise to her, which confirmed his suspicion that she'd been less than truthful about her reasons for coming to Timber Creek. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, deciding not to challenge her story. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" Mr. Fletcher suggested the boarding house run by Mrs. Parker. "Apparently she takes in respectable women and has reasonable rates." Hannah glanced down the street uncertainly. "Would you happen to know where I might find it?" "At the end of Cedar Street, just past the church," Quinn replied. He hesitated, then added, "I can walk you there if you'd like." Relief softened her features. "That would be very kind. My wagon is behind the general store." They walked together to retrieve her wagon, an awkward silence between them. Quinn sensed Hannah was weighing how much to reveal about her situation, and he found himself uncharacteristically curious about this woman who had clearly traveled far under false pretenses. As they reached the wagon, Quinn noticed a small object on the ground near the wheel, something that must have fallen from inside. He bent to retrieve it, finding a small wooden heart in his palm, intricately carved with wildflower designs. "I believe you dropped this, Miss Keller," he said, extending his hand. Hannah's eyes widened in alarm and she quickly reached for the carving. "Thank you, I didn't realize," she stopped abruptly, closing her fingers around the wooden heart. "It's beautiful work," Quinn observed. "May I ask who it belongs to?" Hannah hesitated, then tucked the heart carefully into her pocket. "It's a reminder of home," she said softly, "something to keep close when the world feels unfamiliar." There was a story there. Quinn could see it in the gentle way she handled the carving, the emotion that crossed her face when she looked at it. But it wasn't his place to pry. "The boarding house is this way," he said instead, gesturing toward Cedar Street. "I'll help you with your wagon." As they made their way through town, Quinn found himself unusually attentive to Hannah's reactions to their surroundings. She observed everything with keen interest, the people, the buildings, even the mountains visible in the distance. It wasn't the behavior of someone who had traveled extensively in the West. "Is this your first time in Colorado territory?" he asked. Hannah nodded. "Yes, I've lived in Pennsylvania my entire life until recently." "That's quite a journey to make alone." She glanced at him, wariness returning to her expression. "Sometimes circumstances don't leave much choice, Mr. Hawkins." The quiet determination in her voice silenced further questions. Whatever had driven Hannah Keller from her home in Pennsylvania to the frontier town of Timber Creek was clearly a subject she wasn't ready to discuss. They reached the boarding house, a neat two-story building with a small garden in front. Mrs. Parker proved to be a stern but fair-minded widow in her 50s who eyed Hannah with assessing scrutiny before declaring that she had one room available for a respectable young woman. $5 a week includes breakfast and supper," Mrs. Parker stated firmly. "No gentlemen callers in the rooms, no returning after 9 in the evening, and church attendance on Sundays is expected." "That seems very fair," Hannah replied. "Thank you." As Hannah completed the arrangements, Quinn unloaded her single trunk from the wagon. He carried it upstairs to the small but clean room Mrs. Parker showed them, setting it at the foot of the narrow bed. "The livery will board your horses and store your wagon for a reasonable fee," he told Hannah as they descended to the front porch. "I can take them over for you if you'd like." "You've been very kind, Mr. Hawkins," Hannah said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "But I've imposed on you enough. I can manage from here." Quinn nodded, though he found himself reluctant to leave her. There was something about Hannah Keller that intrigued him, perhaps her quiet determination or the mystery surrounding her presence in Timber Creek. "If you need anything while I'm still in town, I'm staying at the Western Hotel," he said. "We'll be here until Thursday morning." "Thank you, I appreciate knowing that." Hannah extended her hand, which Quinn took gently. "Goodbye, Mr. Hawkins." "Miss Keller," he replied with a nod, releasing her hand and stepping back. As he walked away, Quinn fought the urge to look back. Hannah Keller and her carved wooden heart were not his concern. In 2 days he'd be heading back to the ranch and she would remain in Timber Creek, pursuing whatever purpose had brought her west. Their paths had crossed briefly, as was common on the frontier, and now they would diverge again. Yet somehow Quinn suspected their story wasn't finished yet, and for the first time in years he found himself curious about what might come next. The Timber Creek Hotel dining room was half empty when Quinn entered for breakfast the following morning. He'd spent the previous evening reviewing contracts and writing correspondence rather than joining his men at the saloon, a decision his clear head now appreciated. As he waited for his food, the door opened to admit Hannah Keller. She was dressed in a simple green dress that complemented her eyes, her hair arranged in a neat bun. When she spotted Quinn, surprise and what looked like relief crossed her face. Quinn rose from his table. "Good morning, Miss Keller. Would you care to join me?" Hannah hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Hawkins, that's very kind." As she took the seat across from him, Quinn noticed the shadows beneath her eyes, suggesting a restless night. "How are you finding Mrs. Parker's boarding house?" he asked. "The accommodations are comfortable," Hannah replied, though something in her tone suggested otherwise. "Mrs. Parker has been informative about the town and its residents." Quinn couldn't help a small smile. "I imagine she has. Mrs. Parker knows everyone's business in Timber Creek, whether they want her to or not." This drew a genuine laugh from Hannah, the sound transforming her face and catching Quinn off guard with its warmth. "She certainly seems to," Hannah agreed. "By breakfast this morning, I'd learned about 3 scandalous marriages, 2 business rivalries, and exactly which families attend church regularly and which do not." Their breakfast arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. As they began to eat, Quinn found himself studying Hannah with growing curiosity. In daylight, she seemed younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps only 20 or 21, and there was an innocence to her that contrasted with the determination he'd witnessed. Have you found what you're looking for in Timber Creek? He asked carefully. Hannah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down slowly. What makes you think I'm looking for something? Most people don't travel alone across half the country without purpose, Quinn replied. Especially young women from Pennsylvania. She studied him for a moment as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she said, I'm searching for someone I believed would be here. Your uncle. A faint smile touched her lips. No. There is no uncle, as I suspect you've already guessed. Quinn nodded, appreciating her honesty. Who then? Hannah's hand moved unconsciously to her pocket, where Quinn suspected she kept the carved wooden heart. Someone who once meant a great deal to me, someone who left unexpectedly. The pain in her voice was unmistakable, and Quinn found himself unexpectedly moved by it. A sweetheart? He asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. Forgive me, that's none of my business. No, it's all right, Hannah said softly. Not a sweetheart exactly, my brother Nathan. This was unexpected. Your brother came west. Hannah nodded, her expression clouding. 2 years ago, after our parents died, we lost the family home to creditors, and Nathan, he took it hard. Said he would go west, make his fortune, and send for me. Her voice faltered slightly. His letters came regularly at first. Colorado Territory, he wrote, a town called Timber Creek where he'd found work with a rancher. But then the letters stopped coming 8 months ago. No explanation, nothing. Quinn frowned, and you've had no word since. Just one final letter that arrived months late. It contained money, more than Nathan had ever sent before, and a note saying he was in some kind of trouble but that he would fix it. Hannah's fingers traced patterns on the tablecloth. He wrote that if I didn't hear from him again, I should come to Timber Creek and ask for him at the mercantile. That someone there would know where to find him. And the mercantile owner knew nothing. Mr. Fletcher had never heard of Nathan Keller, Hannah confirmed, disappointment evident in her voice. But he did recognize the name of the ranch Nathan mentioned in his earlier letters, the Circle T. Apparently, it's about 20 miles north of here. Quinn's interest sharpened. Thomas Taylor's place. Hannah looked up quickly. You know it. Everyone in these parts knows the Circle T. Thomas Taylor runs the largest ranch in the county, not a man to cross. Quinn considered what he knew of Taylor, a hard businessman with political ambitions who employed a rough crew. If your brother worked there, someone at the ranch would remember him. Hope brightened Hannah's eyes. That's what Mr. Fletcher suggested. He said the ranch hands sometimes come into town on Saturdays, but otherwise, I'd need to travel out there myself. The idea of Hannah traveling alone to the Circle T raised immediate concerns for Quinn. Some of Taylor's men had unsavory reputations, and a young woman arriving unannounced would face unwelcome attention at best. When were you planning to go? He asked, keeping his tone neutral. Tomorrow, hopefully, Mr. Fletcher said he might know someone who could drive me out there and back for a reasonable fee. Quinn found himself speaking before he'd fully considered the implications. I could take you. Hannah's surprise matched his own at the offer. You. But didn't you say your cattle drive leaves Thursday morning? We do, but I can spare tomorrow. Quinn wasn't sure why he was volunteering. Getting involved in Hannah Keller's problems went against every rule he'd set for himself on the trail. Yet something about her determination and vulnerability made it impossible for him to simply ride away. That's very generous, Mr. Hawkins, but I couldn't ask you to. You didn't ask, Quinn interrupted gently. I offered. And frankly, Miss Keller, the Circle T isn't a place for a woman to visit without proper escort. Some of Taylor's men have rough ways. Hannah considered his words, conflict evident in her expression. Finally, she nodded. If you're certain it wouldn't inconvenience you, I would be very grateful for your company. Then it's settled. I'll arrange for horses and meet you here at 7 tomorrow morning. Quinn took a sip of his coffee, wondering at the satisfaction he felt at her acceptance. Thank you, Hannah said softly, truly. As they finished their breakfast and prepared to part ways, Quinn found himself asking, the carved heart you carry, did your brother make it? Hannah withdrew the small wooden carving from her pocket, holding it gently in her palm for him to see more clearly. The craftsmanship was evident in the delicate wildflowers etched into its surface. Yes, she confirmed. Nathan was always talented with a knife and wood. He carved this from a branch of the apple tree behind our house the day before he left. Her thumb traced the pattern lovingly. He said as long as I had his heart, he'd find his way back to me someday. The simple sentiment struck Quinn unexpectedly. He'd spent years avoiding attachments, believing them to be weaknesses in the harsh reality of frontier life. Yet here was Hannah, who had traveled across the country based on nothing more than love for her brother and faith in a promise symbolized by a small wooden heart. "We'll find him," Quinn said, surprising himself with the sincerity of his promise. "Or at least discover what happened to him." Hannah's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, hopeful, warm, and somehow both delicate and powerful. "I believe we will, Mr. Hawkins." As they parted outside the hotel, Quinn walking toward the livery and Hannah toward the general store, he found himself wondering about the wisdom of his involvement. Hannah's search for her brother could lead anywhere, to joyful reunion or heartbreaking discovery. By offering his help, he had willingly stepped into a situation that could only complicate his carefully ordered life. Yet for the first time in years, Quinn felt something stir within him, a willingness to risk the emotional entanglement he'd so long avoided. Whatever tomorrow brought at the Circle T Ranch, he realized he no longer wished to merely observe Hannah Keller's story from a distance. Somehow, against all his better judgment, he had become part of it. True to his word, Quinn was waiting outside the hotel when Hannah arrived the following morning. He had arranged for 2 horses from the livery, his own palomino and a gentle mare for Hannah. The early morning light cast long shadows down the empty street as they prepared to depart. "Have you ridden much?" Quinn asked as he adjusted the mare's saddle. Hannah nodded, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "We had horses in Pennsylvania, though it's been some time since I rode regularly." "Daisy here is steady as they come," Quinn assured her, patting the mare's neck. "She'll give you no trouble." Hannah approached the horse, stroking its nose gently. "Hello, Daisy," she murmured. "We're going to be friends, aren't we?" Quinn found himself smiling at the interaction. There was something refreshing about Hannah's straightforward kindness, even toward animals, that contrasted sharply with the hardened pragmatism he was accustomed to on the frontier. He helped Hannah mount, noting with approval that despite her admitted lack of recent experience, she sat comfortably in the saddle and handled the reins with confidence. As they set out northward, the town quickly fell behind them, replaced by rolling grasslands dotted with stands of pine and aspen. The day promised to be clear and warm, with only a few clouds drifting across the vast Colorado sky. They rode at an easy pace, allowing Hannah to reacquaint herself with riding while Quinn kept a watchful eye on their surroundings. Though the territory was relatively settled near Timber Creek, habits of vigilance were deeply ingrained in any experienced frontiersman. "It's beautiful," Hannah commented after they had ridden in comfortable silence for some time. "Different from Pennsylvania, but beautiful in its own way." Quinn nodded, seeing the landscape through fresh eyes. Most newcomers only see the harshness at first, the distance between towns, the lack of trees in some parts, the extremes of weather. But there's something about this country that gets under your skin. "How long have you been out west?" Hannah asked. 8 years now," Quinn replied. "Came out at 17, worked as a ranch hand until I learned enough to lead cattle drives. Now I work for the Bar M Ranch over near Eagle Canyon." "Do you ever miss home?" The question was simple but pierced deeper than Hannah could have known. Quinn was silent for a moment before answering. "Home was never a place I was eager to return to. My father was a difficult man, especially after my mother died. When I left Ohio, I didn't look back." Hannah seemed to sense the weight behind his words and didn't press further. Instead, she shared more about her own home, a small town near Philadelphia where her father had been a schoolteacher and her mother had run a millinery shop. "We never had much," she explained, "but we were happy." Nathan was 5 years older than me, always the adventurous one. He would disappear for hours exploring the woods, bringing home interesting stones or carving little animals from branches. The fondness in her voice when she spoke of her brother was unmistakable, making Quinn increasingly curious about the man who had inspired such loyalty. "What happened to your parents?" he asked gently. Hannah's expression sobered. Influenza 2 winters ago, it swept through town quickly. My father fell ill first, then my mother as she cared for him. Nathan and I did everything we could, but, she shook her head, the memory clearly still painful. Afterward, we discovered father had borrowed against the house for years to maintain appearances. The creditors gave us 3 months before taking everything. That's when your brother decided to go west. Yes, Nathan had always dreamed of the frontier, reading dime novels about cowboys and gold miners. He said this was his chance to make something of himself, to build a new life for both of us. Hannah's voice softened. I wanted to come with him, but he insisted I stay with my aunt until he was established. Said it was too dangerous for me to travel west until he could properly look after me. He wasn't wrong, Quinn observed. The journey can be perilous, especially for women traveling alone. So everyone keeps telling me, Hannah replied with a hint of defiance. Yet here I am, having made the journey safely enough. Quinn couldn't help a small smile at her spirit. Here you are indeed, Miss Keller, though I suspect you encountered more difficulties than you're admitting. A shadow crossed Hannah's face, confirming his suspicion. Perhaps, but difficulties pass, Mr. Hawkins. Regrets at not acting when one should have, those tend to linger. The wisdom in her words struck Quinn unexpectedly. How many regrets had he accumulated in his years of careful emotional distance? How many connections had he avoided out of fear rather than prudence? They rode on, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, the wildlife they observed, the changing landscape as they traveled northward, stories of Quinn's experiences on cattle drives. Hannah proved to be a good listener, asking thoughtful questions and laughing genuinely at his occasional humorous anecdotes. By midday, they stopped in a small grove of aspens near a creek to rest the horses and eat the lunch Quinn had packed: bread, cheese, and dried apples from the hotel kitchen. As they sat on a fallen log, the dappled sunlight playing through the leaves above them, Quinn found himself more at ease than he could remember being in years. We should reach the Circle T within the hour, he said as they prepared to continue their journey. Taylor's main house and outbuildings are in a valley just beyond that ridge. He pointed to a distant line of hills. Hannah nodded, her expression growing more serious. What sort of man is Thomas Taylor, Mr.? Fletcher spoke of him with respect but seemed cautious. Quinn considered how to answer truthfully without alarming her unnecessarily. Taylor started with nothing 20 years ago and now runs the largest ranch in the county. He didn't achieve that by being soft. He's known for driving hard bargains and expecting absolute loyalty from his men. He paused. Some say he doesn't always concern himself with the letter of the law when it conflicts with his interests. You mean he's dishonest? Hannah asked directly. I mean he's powerful enough in these parts that his version of events tends to become the accepted truth, Quinn clarified. The sheriff and county judge both owe their positions to his support. Hannah absorbed this information with a small frown. And you believe my brother worked for such a man? If Nathan mentioned the Circle T in his letters, then yes, it seems likely. But not everyone who works for Taylor is cut from the same cloth. Some are just cowboys looking for steady work. This seemed to reassure Hannah somewhat, though Quinn noted her hand moved unconsciously to her pocket where she kept the carved heart. It had become a gesture he recognized, a seeking of comfort or courage in moments of uncertainty. As they mounted their horses to continue the journey, Quinn found himself hoping that their visit to the Circle T would yield the answers Hannah sought. Yet a growing uneasiness suggested that whatever had befallen Nathan Keller after his letters stopped might not bring the resolution his sister hoped for. The Circle T ranch came into view exactly as Quinn had predicted, sprawling across a verdant valley with mountains rising majestically behind it. The main house was larger and more impressive than most frontier dwellings, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and glass windows. Several outbuildings, barns, and corrals surrounded it, with cowboys visible working among the cattle in distant pastures. As they approached the main house, a ranch hand spotted them and called out to someone unseen. By the time they reached the yard, 3 men had emerged onto the porch, watching their arrival with evident curiosity and suspicion. Quinn recognized Thomas Taylor immediately, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His expression was impassive as he assessed the visitors, his hand resting casually near the revolver on his hip. "That's far enough," called one of the men beside Taylor, younger, with a hard face and cold eyes that lingered inappropriately on Hannah. "State your business." Quinn halted his horse, gesturing for Hannah to do likewise. "Quinn Hawkins from the Bar M Ranch," he called back, "here to speak with Mr. Taylor if he's receiving visitors." Taylor stepped forward, recognition flickering across his face. "Hawkins. You run cattle through these parts occasionally?" "Yes, sir, just delivered a herd to Timber Creek yesterday." Taylor's gaze shifted to Hannah, his expression unreadable. "And who might the lady be?" Quinn glanced at Hannah, silently asking permission to explain. At her nod, he continued, "This is Miss Hannah Keller. She's looking for information about her brother, Nathan Keller. We believe he worked here at the Circle T until about 8 months ago." A subtle tension seemed to spread among the men on the porch. The hard-faced man exchanged a quick glance with Taylor, who maintained his composure perfectly. "Keller," Taylor repeated, as if testing the name, "can't say it rings any bells immediately. We hire a lot of hands, especially during roundup season." He turned to the third man on the porch. "Peterson, you keep the payroll records. Name mean anything to you?" The man called Peterson, thin, with spectacles perched on a narrow nose, shook his head. "Not offhand, sir. I need to check the books." Taylor turned back to Quinn and Hannah. "Well, you've come a long way. Might as well come inside while Peterson checks the records." He gestured toward the house. "Miss Keller, I'm sure you could use some refreshment after your ride." Quinn dismounted first, then helped Hannah from her saddle. As she stood beside him, he noted the tension in her posture and gave her arm a reassuring squeeze before releasing it. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Taylor," Hannah said, her voice steady despite her evident nervousness. As they followed Taylor into the house, Quinn maintained a protective position beside Hannah. The hard-faced man, whom Taylor introduced as Garrett, his foreman, walked behind them, his presence feeling more like a guard than an escort. The interior of Taylor's home revealed unexpected luxury for a frontier dwelling: Eastern furniture, proper rugs, and even paintings on the walls. They were led to a sitting room where Taylor invited them to be seated while a housekeeper was dispatched to bring coffee. "Now, Miss Keller," Taylor said once they were settled, "tell me about this brother of yours. When exactly did he work here and what was his position?" Hannah straightened in her chair. "Nathan arrived in Colorado Territory a little under 2 years ago. His letters mentioned finding work at the Circle T approximately 6 months after that, though he didn't specify his exact duties. He wrote regularly until 8 months ago, when his letters suddenly stopped." Taylor nodded thoughtfully. "And you're certain he mentioned the Circle T by name?" "Absolutely certain," Hannah affirmed. "He described it as the largest ranch in the county, owned by a man named Taylor who rewards hard work generously." A small smile touched Taylor's lips at the description. "Well, I'd like to think that's accurate. But as I said, we hire many hands, particularly during busy seasons. Some stay only briefly before moving on." The coffee arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. As they were served, Peterson returned with a ledger book which he handed to Taylor before taking a seat. "I've checked the records for the past 2 years, sir," Peterson reported. "No Nathan Keller on the payroll during that time." Hannah's face fell visibly. "That's impossible. Nathan specifically wrote about working here. He sent money home regularly, more than he could have earned as a drifter." Taylor spread his hands apologetically. "I'm sorry, Miss Keller, but our records are meticulously kept. If your brother worked here, he would be in this book." Quinn, who had been quietly observing the interactions, noted something that struck him as odd: the quickness with which Peterson had returned with his answer, and the subtle tension that remained in the room despite the seemingly straightforward explanation. "Is it possible," Quinn suggested carefully, "that he might have used another name, or perhaps worked for one of your contractors rather than directly for the ranch?" Taylor's gaze sharpened slightly as it shifted to Quinn. "Possible, I suppose. Many men out west adopt new names for various reasons, some honorable, some less so. Was there anything distinctive about your brother, Miss Keller? Something that might help identify him regardless of the name he used?" Hannah hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew the carved wooden heart. Nathan was skilled at carving. He often made small gifts like this for people he cared about. As she held out the heart for inspection, Quinn noticed an immediate reaction from Garrett, who had remained standing near the door. The foreman stiffened almost imperceptibly, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the carving. Taylor examined the heart with apparent casual interest, turning it over in his hand. "Fine work," he commented, returning it to Hannah. "But I can't say I recognize the style. Many cowboys whittle to pass the time." "If I might make a suggestion," Quinn interjected, "perhaps Miss Keller could speak with some of your longer-term hands. Someone might remember her brother, even if he used another name." A flash of annoyance crossed Taylor's face before his expression smoothed again. "Most of my men are out with the herd today, but I suppose we could arrange something tomorrow." "Actually, sir," Peterson interrupted, "the North Pasture crew should be coming in shortly for supplies. They've been working here for over 2 years now." Taylor shot Peterson a look that Quinn couldn't quite interpret before nodding reluctantly. "Very well, when they arrive, Miss Keller can speak with them briefly." The conversation shifted to general topics: the cattle business, the weather, Taylor's plans to expand his operation. Throughout, Quinn remained alert to the undercurrents in the room. Something about the situation felt wrong, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what was causing his unease. When hoofbeats and voices announced the arrival of riders in the yard, Taylor rose. "That would be the North Pasture crew now, shall we, Miss Keller?" Hannah stood quickly, hope evident in her expression. Quinn followed as they moved to the front porch, where 4 dust-covered cowboys were dismounting near the supply shed. "Jackson," Taylor called to one of the men, "bring your crew over here for a moment." The cowboys approached, curiosity evident in their expressions as they noticed Hannah. They removed their hats respectfully as they reached the porch. "These men have all worked for me for at least 2 years," Taylor explained to Hannah. "Miss Keller is looking for her brother, Nathan, who may have worked here under that name or another. She believes he was employed here until about 8 months ago." Hannah stepped forward, her voice clear despite her obvious nervousness. "My brother is 26 with light brown hair and green eyes like mine. He's of medium height and build, and he has a small scar on his left cheek from a childhood accident. He's skilled at carving wood like this." She showed them the heart. The cowboys exchanged glances, their expressions difficult to read. Finally, the one called Jackson shook his head. "Don't recall anyone matching that description, ma'am, sorry." The others murmured similar denials, though Quinn noticed one young cowboy, barely more than a boy, shifting uncomfortably and avoiding eye contact. Hannah's shoulders slumped slightly, but she pressed on. "He would have been sending letters to Pennsylvania regularly. Perhaps you remember someone doing that." Again, negative responses from most of the men. But the young cowboy's discomfort grew more pronounced, drawing Garrett's attention. The foreman moved closer to him, placing a hand on his shoulder in what might have appeared to be a friendly gesture but which Quinn recognized as a warning. "Thank you for your time, boys," Taylor said dismissively. "Get your supplies and get back to work." As the cowboys moved away, Quinn made a quick decision. "I need to check on our horses," he said to Hannah. "Wait here with Mr. Taylor." Before anyone could object, Quinn descended the porch steps and moved toward where they had left their mounts. Instead of going directly to the horses, however, he circled around toward the supply shed where the young cowboy had gone. Timing his movement to avoid Garrett's watchful eye, Quinn slipped into the shed and found the young cowboy alone, collecting supplies. "I need to talk to you," Quinn said quietly but firmly, startling the young man. "I don't know nothing," the cowboy replied immediately, his face pale beneath his tan. "You recognize the description of Nathan Keller," Quinn pressed. "I saw it in your face." The young man glanced nervously toward the door. "Mister, you don't understand. I can't talk about this. They'll what?" Quinn asked, stepping closer. "What happens to men who ask questions about Nathan Keller?" The cowboy's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I liked Nate. He was decent to me when others weren't, but I got a job here and I need it." "I can't." "Just tell me if he worked here," Quinn interrupted, aware that their time was limited. "His sister has traveled all the way from Pennsylvania to find him." Something in the young man's expression shifted at the mention of Hannah. "The one with the green eyes, that's really his sister." Quinn nodded. She's been searching for months. Nathan stopped writing home and she's worried. The cowboy seemed to reach a decision. He lowered his voice to barely above a whisper. He was here. Called himself Nate Kelly, not Keller, made those little carvings for folks sometimes. His eyes darted to the door again. But you didn't hear it from me, and if you care about that lady, you'll get her away from here. Vast. What happened to him? Quinn pressed. The sound of approaching footsteps cut their conversation short. The young cowboy grabbed his supplies and brushed past Quinn, whispering as he went, "Ask about the accident at Eagle Canyon. November last year." Quinn pretended to be examining a saddle when Garrett appeared in the doorway moments later. The foreman's cold eyes studied him suspiciously. "Looking for something, Hawkins?" Quinn straightened casually. "Just checking if you had any saddle oil. My horse's tack could use some attention." "Supply shed is for Circle T hands only," Garrett replied flatly. "Mr. Taylor sent me to tell you he's busy with ranch business now. He suggests you and the lady head back to town before it gets too late." The dismissal was clear, and Quinn knew pressing further would only increase suspicions. "Of course, we appreciate Mr. Taylor's time." When Quinn returned to the porch, he found Hannah thanking Taylor with admirable composure despite the obvious disappointment in her eyes. Quinn assisted her onto her horse, conscious of Garrett watching their every move from the porch. As they rode away from the Circle T, Quinn maintained a casual pace until they were out of sight of the ranch. Only then did he guide his horse closer to Hannah's and speak in a low voice. "Your brother was there, Hannah. He called himself Nate Kelly instead of Keller, but one of the young hands recognized him from your description and the carving." Hope and confusion battled in Hannah's expression. "Then why would they deny knowing him? Where is he now?" Quinn hesitated, unsure how much to share of the cowboy's warning. "I don't know exactly, but something happened, something called the accident at Eagle Canyon last November." "That's when your brother's letters stopped, isn't it?" Hannah nodded slowly, her face paling. "The last letter came in early December, but it might have been sent before whatever happened." Her voice faltered. "Quinn, do you think Nathan is?" "I don't know," he interrupted gently. "But something isn't right at the Circle T, the way they reacted to your questions, the warning that boy gave me. We need to be careful how we proceed." Hannah straightened in her saddle, determination replacing fear in her expression. "What do we do next?" The question caught Quinn off guard. There shouldn't be a next for him. His cattle drive was leaving in the morning, and Hannah Keller's search for her brother was not his responsibility. Yet even as these thoughts crossed his mind, he knew he had already made his decision. "We find out what happened at Eagle Canyon," he said, surprising himself with the firmness of his commitment. "But first, we need to get back to town. I don't think Taylor or his men will follow us, but I'd rather not test that assumption after dark." As they rode toward Timber Creek, the setting sun casting long shadows across the grassland, Quinn found himself contemplating the unexpected turn his life had taken in just a few days. The careful distance he had maintained from others' problems, the emotional walls he had built to protect himself from attachment, were crumbling in the face of Hannah Keller's quiet courage and the mystery of her brother's fate. Whatever had happened to Nathan Keller at Eagle Canyon, Quinn was now determined to uncover the truth. And in that determination, he recognized a shift within himself, a willingness to care about something beyond survival and duty for the first time in years. The return journey to Timber Creek passed in tense silence, both Hannah and Quinn lost in their own thoughts. As they approached town, the setting sun painted the western sky in dramatic shades of orange and purple, the beauty a stark contrast to the unease they both felt. "We should avoid being seen together too much," Quinn said as they neared the livery. "If Taylor has friends in town, I don't want them reporting back that we're continuing to ask questions." Hannah nodded, though concern creased her brow. "Where will we meet to discuss our next steps?" Quinn considered for a moment. "There's a small cafe behind the general store, Miller's Place. Not many people know about it. Meet me there tomorrow at noon." "But your cattle drive leaves tomorrow morning," Hannah reminded him, surprise evident in her voice. Quinn's jaw tightened as he made the decision he'd been contemplating since they left the Circle T. "I'm sending the men back without me. Mac can handle the return journey. He's been my right hand for years." Quinn, no, Hannah reached across to touch his arm. I can't ask you to do that. Your job, your responsibilities. You didn't ask, Quinn interrupted gently, and some responsibilities outweigh others. Something happened to your brother, Hannah, something people at the Circle T are hiding. You came all this way alone to find him. I can't in good conscience ride away knowing what I know now. The gratitude that filled Hannah's eyes made something shift in Quinn's chest, a warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Thank you, she said simply, the words carrying more weight than any elaborate expression of gratitude could have. They parted at the livery, Quinn accompanying Hannah to Mrs. Parker's boarding house to ensure she arrived safely before returning to the hotel. There, he found Mac in the saloon and pulled him aside to explain the situation. You want me to take the boys back without you? Mac repeated, surprise evident in his weathered face. Just for a week or so, Quinn explained. There's a situation here I need to help with. Tell Mr. Mitchell I'll explain everything when I return. Mac studied him with shrewd eyes. This have anything to do with that pretty young lady I saw you riding out with this morning? Quinn didn't bother denying it. Her brother's missing. I have reason to believe he met with foul play at the Circle T ranch. Mac whistled low. Taylor's outfit, you're poking a hornet's nest there, Quinn. I know, but I gave my word I'd help her. A slow smile spread across Mac's face. Well, never thought I'd see the day Quinn Hawkins let himself get involved in someone else's troubles. He clapped Quinn on the shoulder. Don't worry about the drive, I'll get the boys home safe and explain things to Mitchell. Just watch yourself with Taylor. Man's got a long reach in these parts. Quinn nodded, grateful for his friend's understanding. I'll be careful. And Mac, thanks. After arranging with the hotel to extend his stay, Quinn spent the evening gathering what information he could about Eagle Canyon and the accident the young cowboy had mentioned. The bartender knew nothing specific but remembered hearing that several Circle T hands had died in a rockslide while moving cattle through the canyon last fall. Terrible business, the bartender commented as he wiped down the bar. Taylor brought the bodies back for burial himself, paid for proper markers and everything. Say what you will about the man, but he looks after his own. Quinn's instincts, honed by years on the frontier, told him there was more to the story. Why would Taylor and his men go to such lengths to deny knowing Nathan Keller if he had simply died in an accident? And why had Garrett reacted so strongly to the sight of the carved wooden heart? The following morning, Quinn saw his men off at dawn, giving Mac final instructions before watching the group ride out. A weight of responsibility lifted from his shoulders even as a new one settled in its place. For the first time in years, Quinn was acting not out of duty or practicality but from something deeper, a sense that Hannah's quest mattered, that uncovering the truth about her brother was simply the right thing to do. He spent the morning making discreet inquiries about Eagle Canyon, learning it was a narrow passage through the mountains about 15 miles northwest of town, occasionally used as a shortcut for moving cattle between valleys but treacherous during bad weather. At noon, Quinn arrived at Miller's place to find Hannah already seated at a corner table, a cup of tea before her. She wore a simple blue dress with a white collar, her honey blonde hair partly concealed by a modest bonnet. Despite the plainness of her attire, Quinn was struck again by her natural beauty, not the practiced allure of saloon girls or the polished refinement of wealthy ladies, but a genuine loveliness that seemed to radiate from within. Did your men get off all right? Hannah asked as he joined her. Quinn nodded. Mac will see them safely back. He's a good man, been with me for years. I still feel terrible about taking you away from your work. Don't, Quinn said simply. This is more important. A faint blush colored Hannah's cheeks at his words. She looked down, adjusting her teacup before meeting his eyes again. Have you learned anything more about what might have happened? Quinn shared what the bartender had told him about the rockslide in Eagle Canyon. According to local gossip, several Circle T hands died in an accident there last November, right around the time your brother's letters stopped. Hannah paled but maintained her composure. Do we know who died? Are there records or graves we could check? The newspaper office might have reports, and there should be markers in the town cemetery. Quinn hesitated, then reached across the table to cover her hand with his. Hannah, we need to prepare for the possibility that That Nathan was among those who died, she finished for him, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. I understand, Quinn. But if that's what happened, why would Taylor deny knowing him? Why not simply tell me the truth? That's what we need to find out, Quinn agreed, and there's something else that doesn't add up. The young cowboy I spoke with was genuinely afraid, not just of losing his job, but of something worse. Whatever happened at Eagle Canyon, I don't think it was a simple accident. They formulated a plan over lunch. Quinn would visit the newspaper office to check reports of the accident, while Hannah would go to the cemetery to look for Nathan's grave. They would meet again in the evening to share what they'd learned. As they prepared to part ways outside the cafe, Hannah suddenly reached into her pocket and withdrew the carved wooden heart. I want you to hold this for me, she said, pressing it into Quinn's hand. It's the most precious thing I own, but I'm afraid of losing it if someone from the Circle T recognizes me and confronts me at the cemetery. Quinn closed his fingers around the small carving, feeling both the smoothness of the polished wood and the delicate ridges of the etched flowers. I'll keep it safe, he promised, carefully placing it in his vest pocket, but be careful, Hannah. If you see anyone suspicious, leave immediately and come find me. She nodded, her green eyes holding his for a moment longer than necessary. Then, with a small smile, she turned and walked toward the cemetery at the edge of town. Quinn watched her go, the wooden heart a tangible weight against his chest. In just a few days, this woman and her missing brother had somehow become more important to him than anything had been in years. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. At the newspaper office, Quinn introduced himself as a rancher interested in learning from past accidents to prevent future tragedies. The editor, a thin man with ink-stained fingers named Gerald Porter, seemed eager to help. The Eagle Canyon incident, terrible business, Porter said, rummaging through a stack of past issues, happened during that early snowstorm in November. Here we are, November 18th edition. He handed Quinn the newspaper, open to a short article titled Tragedy at Eagle Canyon. Quinn read quickly, learning that 4 Circle T ranch hands had died when a sudden rockslide buried them while they were moving cattle through the narrow passage. The article named the deceased as James Wilson, Frank Cooper, William Thomas, and Edward Baker. No mention of a Nathan Kelly or Keller, Quinn noted, trying to hide his confusion. Porter shook his head. Those were all the names provided by Mr. Taylor. He was quite broken up about it, brought the bodies back himself and paid for proper burials. Said they were good men who died doing their duty. Were there any unusual circumstances about the accident? Quinn asked carefully. The editor gave him a curious look. Like what? Anything that might have seemed out of the ordinary. Witnesses with different accounts, unexpected timing of the cattle drive, that sort of thing. Porter's expression grew thoughtful. Now that you mention it, there was some talk about why Taylor would move cattle through Eagle Canyon that time of year. It's notoriously dangerous after the first frost, but then, Taylor's always been one to take calculated risks. It's how he built his empire. He paused. There was also some confusion about how many men were actually lost. Quinn's interest sharpened. What do you mean? Well, initially the report was that 5 men had died. But when Taylor brought the bodies back, there were only 4, Porter shrugged. Probably just confusion in the immediate aftermath, happens often in tragedies. Or a deliberate omission, Quinn thought but didn't say. Did anyone question the discrepancy? Sheriff Mills looked into it briefly, but Taylor explained that 1 man had been reported missing in the chaos but turned up alive later, just separated from the group during the rockslide. Porter gave Quinn a curious look. Why so interested in old news, Mr. Hawkins? Quinn maintained a casual demeanor, just trying to learn from others' mistakes. Moving cattle through dangerous terrain is part of our business. Better to learn from tragedy than repeat it. After thanking the editor, Quinn left with his mind racing. If Nathan had been present during the rockslide but wasn't among the officially reported dead, what had happened to him? Had he been the mysterious 5th man who supposedly turned up alive? Or was there something more sinister at play? As evening approached, Quinn grew increasingly concerned when Hannah didn't appear at their agreed meeting place. He waited at Miller's place for an hour past the appointed time before setting out to look for her, a sense of dread building with each passing minute. The cemetery yielded no sign of her, nor did Mrs. Parker's boarding house. The landlady reported that Hannah had returned briefly in the afternoon but had gone out again, saying she had important business to attend to. Quinn was considering a more extensive search when a street urchin approached him outside the hotel. "You Quinn Hawkins?" the boy asked, peering up from beneath a too large cap. At Quinn's nod, the boy thrust a folded paper into his hand. "Lady said give you this, said it's important." Before Quinn could question him further, the boy darted away into the gathering dusk. Quinn unfolded the paper with growing apprehension, immediately recognizing Hannah's neat handwriting. "Quinn, I've discovered something important about Nathan. Someone who knew him has agreed to meet me outside town this evening to tell me what really happened. I didn't want to wait for you as they seemed frightened and might change their mind. I'm meeting them at sunset near the old Miller homestead north of town. Please come as soon as you get this. I may need your help. Hannah. P.S. Please bring the heart. They say it's important." Quinn cursed under his breath, immediately recognizing the danger. The old Miller place was an abandoned homestead 2 miles outside town, isolated and perfect for an ambush. Sunset had already passed, which meant Hannah had been gone for at least an hour. Rushing to the livery, Quinn saddled his horse with frantic speed. The wooden heart seemed to burn in his pocket as he mounted and spurred the animal northward, praying he wasn't too late. The old Miller homestead loomed dark against the twilight sky, its abandoned buildings silent and foreboding. Quinn approached cautiously, alert for any sign of movement. A single horse was tethered near the crumbling main house, Hannah's mare from the livery. Drawing his revolver, Quinn dismounted and moved silently toward the structure. A faint light flickered from within, a lantern, its glow visible through cracks in the boarded windows. As he neared the door, he heard voices, Hannah's, tight with fear but defiant, and a man's, low and threatening. "I've told you everything I know," Hannah was saying. "Now please tell me what happened to my brother." "The heart first," the man demanded. "I know you have it." Quinn recognized the voice with a chill. "Garrett, Taylor's foreman. I told you it's not here," Hannah insisted. "I left it at my boarding house." The sound of something heavy striking wood, perhaps Garrett's fist against a table, made Quinn wince. "You're lying," Garrett snarled. "Taylor wants that carving and he wants it now. Your brother should never have made it, never have put those marks on it." Quinn had heard enough. He kicked the door open, his revolver aimed squarely at Garrett, who whirled in surprise. Hannah stood pressed against the far wall, a bruise forming on her cheek but otherwise unharmed. "Step away from her," Quinn ordered, his voice deadly calm. Garrett's hand moved toward his holster, but Quinn cocked his revolver. "Don't, you won't clear leather before I put a bullet in you, and we both know it." For a tense moment, Garrett seemed to consider his options. Finally, he raised his hand slowly. "This isn't your business, Hawkins." "You made it my business when you lured Miss Keller out here," Quinn gestured with his gun. "Move away from her now." As Garrett complied, Hannah rushed to Quinn's side. He kept his eyes and gun trained on Garrett while asking, "Are you hurt?" "No, just frightened," she replied shakily. "He was waiting when I arrived, said he had information about Nathan but demanded the heart first." "What's so important about a piece of carved wood, Garrett?" Quinn demanded. "Important enough to kidnap a woman." Garrett's expression hardened. "You have no idea what you're meddling in, Hawkins. That carving isn't just wood, it's evidence. Taylor wants it destroyed." "Evidence of what?" A calculating look crossed Garrett's face. "Maybe we can make a deal. You give me the heart, I tell you what happened to Keller, and we all walk away from this." "Tell us first," Quinn countered, "then we'll discuss the heart." Garrett seemed to weigh his options before responding. "Keller, or Kelly as he called himself, was working for us last year, seemed like a good hand at first, kept to himself mostly. But he had a habit of wandering off alone, spending too much time in places he shouldn't." "What places?" Hannah asked. "Taylor's private study for one, the map room, places where we keep ranch business that doesn't concern cowboys." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "We caught him one night copying figures from Taylor's ledger, cattle counts, shipment dates, buyer information." "He was spying on your operation?" Quinn asked skeptically. Garrett snorted. "Worse, he was gathering evidence for the federal marshal's office. Turned out your precious brother was working undercover, investigating Taylor for cattle rustling and land fraud." Hannah gasped, "That's impossible." Nathan wasn't a lawman. Not officially, Garrett replied, but he was working with them, feeding them information. When Taylor discovered the truth, he confronted Keller. Things got heated. Keller escaped but took something with him, papers that could have caused Taylor serious trouble. "So you arranged an accident at Eagle Canyon," Quinn concluded, the pieces falling into place. "The rockslide that killed 4 men. "The rockslide was real enough," Garrett said with a shrug, "but Keller wasn't killed by it. He was already dead by then, shot while trying to escape with evidence. Taylor decided to claim he was one of the casualties, but when it came time to produce bodies, we had to change the story." Hannah swayed slightly, her face ashen. Quinn steadied her with one arm while keeping his gun trained on Garrett. "And the carved heart," Quinn pressed, "what does that have to do with any of this?" A cruel smile twisted Garrett's features. "Show him, Miss Keller, show him what your clever brother hid in plain sight." Quinn glanced at Hannah, who looked as confused as he felt. Keeping Garrett covered, Quinn reached into his pocket and withdrew the wooden heart. "Is this what you're after?" Garrett's eyes fixed on the carving. "Open it." "What?" "It comes apart, didn't you know?" Garrett laughed mirthlessly. "Your brother was clever, Miss Keller, too clever for his own good." With one hand, Quinn carefully examined the wooden heart, feeling along its edges until he found a nearly invisible seam. Pressing slightly, he felt something give and the heart separated into 2 halves in his palm. Inside was a tightly folded piece of paper. "That," Garrett said, pointing at the paper, "is what Taylor wants. Names, dates, figures, all the evidence your brother collected before we caught him. He must have sent the heart to you for safekeeping, knowing we'd be searching for it." Hannah stared at the folded paper, realization dawning in her eyes. The last letter, the extra money, he knew he was in danger. "What happened to Nathan's body?" Quinn demanded, his voice hard. Garrett's expression grew cold. "That's not part of our deal. Give me the paper, and you both can ride away from this." Quinn's finger tightened on the trigger. "We're not making deals, Garrett. You're going to take us to Sheriff Mills and repeat everything you just told us." A harsh laugh escaped Garrett. "Mills works for Taylor, has for years. Who do you think helped cover up what happened to your brother, Miss Keller?" The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Quinn needed to get Hannah safely away, but he couldn't turn his back on Garrett. "Here's what's going to happen," Quinn said with deadly calm. "We're taking this evidence to the federal marshal in Denver. You're going to stay right here until we're well away." "You'll never make it to Denver," Garrett warned. "Taylor has men all over the territory. The moment he hears you're on the move with that paper, he'll send riders after you." "We'll take that chance." Quinn backed toward the door, keeping Hannah behind him. "Sit down in that chair, Garrett. Hands on the table where I can see them." As Garrett reluctantly complied, Hannah moved to retrieve her hat from a nearby shelf. In that moment of distraction, Garrett lunged for a hidden revolver beneath the table. Quinn fired a split second before Garrett could bring his weapon to bear. The foreman crashed backward, clutching his shoulder where Quinn's bullet had struck him. "Next one goes through your heart if you move again," Quinn warned, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline. They bound Garrett securely to the chair with rope found in the abandoned house, gagging him to prevent him from calling for help if anyone passed nearby. "We need to leave immediately," Quinn told Hannah as they hurried to their horses. "Taylor will send someone looking for Garrett when he doesn't return." Hannah nodded, her face pale but determined as she mounted her mare. "Where will we go? You heard him, the sheriff won't help us." Quinn considered their options as he swung into his saddle. "Eagle Canyon, if Nathan was killed there, there might be more evidence, something that corroborates what's in that paper. Then we ride for Denver and the federal marshal's office." As they spurred their horses northward under the light of the rising moon, Quinn knew they were now fugitives, hunted by the most powerful man in the county and his allies. The carefully ordered existence he had maintained for years had been completely upended in the space of a few days. Yet as he glanced at Hannah riding beside him, her face set with determination despite the grief and shock she must be feeling, Quinn realized he didn't regret his decision to help her. For the first time since he could remember, he was fighting for something that mattered more than mere survival: truth, justice, and perhaps even the beginning of something he had thought impossible on the frontier. A connection that ran deeper than duty or convenience. The wooden heart, now resealed with its precious contents secure inside, rested in his pocket, a symbol of both loss and possibility as they rode into the uncertain night. Dawn broke over the mountains as Quinn and Hannah made their approach to Eagle Canyon. They had ridden through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and consult the crude map Quinn had purchased in Timber Creek before their departure. Both were exhausted, but the urgency of their situation prevented any thought of proper rest. "There," Quinn said, pointing to a narrow gap between towering rock walls ahead. "That's the entrance to the canyon." Hannah's face was drawn with fatigue, but determination kept her upright in the saddle. "Do you think Garrett told the truth about Nathan, that he was already dead before the rockslide?" Quinn wished he could offer comfort, but false hope would be cruel. "I don't know, but if Nathan discovered evidence of Taylor's crimes and tried to escape with it, they would have pursued him. Given what we know about Taylor and his men, I think we have to prepare for the worst." Hannah nodded, her expression somber but composed. "I need to know what happened to him, Quinn, even if it's not what I've been praying for." The entrance to Eagle Canyon narrowed as they approached, the path barely wide enough for two horses to ride abreast. Towering walls of red-orange rock rose on either side, creating a corridor that wound deeper into the mountain range. The November rockslide had occurred farther in, according to the newspaper account. As they proceeded cautiously, Quinn remained alert for any sign of pursuit. Taylor would have discovered Garrett's predicament by now and would undoubtedly have men searching for them. The canyon offered concealment but also created a dangerous bottleneck if they needed to escape quickly. "We're looking for evidence of the rockslide," Quinn explained as they rounded a bend in the canyon. "According to the report, it happened about a mile in, where the passage narrows even further." Hannah scanned the canyon walls, her grief momentarily tempered by purpose. "What exactly are we hoping to find, after so many months?" "Anything that doesn't match Garrett's story," Quinn replied. "If there was a confrontation here, gunfire, a struggle, there might still be evidence, and if your brother was laid to rest somewhere other than the town cemetery, we might find that too." They continued in silence, the only sounds the soft clopping of their horses' hooves on the rocky ground and the occasional call of a bird overhead. The canyon grew darker as the walls rose higher, blocking the early morning sunlight. Quinn estimated they had traveled about 3/4 of a mile when Hannah suddenly reined in her horse. "Look," she said, pointing to the canyon wall on their right. "Those marks are those bullet holes." Quinn dismounted to examine the rock face. Several gouges marred the smooth surface, their pattern consistent with gunfire. "Yes," he confirmed grimly. "Someone fired at least 4 or 5 shots here from about that position." He pointed to a natural alcove across the canyon that would have provided cover for a shooter. Hannah joined him, her gaze following the likely trajectory of the bullets. "So there was a fight here, not just an accident." "It appears so." Quinn studied the ground carefully, aware that months of weather had likely erased most evidence. Yet something caught his eye, a dark stain on a flat rock partially hidden by scrub brush. He knelt to examine it closer. "Blood," he said quietly, "long dried but definitely blood." Hannah's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of her distress. When Quinn looked up at her, her face was pale but composed. "Nathan's." "Impossible to know for certain. But combined with the bullet marks, it suggests Garrett was telling at least partial truth about a confrontation." They continued their search, moving deeper into the canyon until they reached the site of the rockslide, unmistakable from the massive pile of boulders and debris that partially blocked the passage, forcing them to dismount and lead their horses carefully around the obstruction. "4 men supposedly died here," Quinn observed, studying the rockfall, "buried under tons of stone." "But not Nathan," Hannah said quietly, "not if Garrett was telling the truth." Quinn nodded, scanning their surroundings with growing certainty that they were missing something important. If Taylor's men killed Nathan elsewhere in the canyon, they would have needed to dispose of his body discreetly, somewhere it wouldn't be found by casual travelers. The implication hung heavily between them as they continued their search, examining side crevices and shallow caves along the canyon walls. After nearly an hour of careful investigation, Hannah called out from a narrow fissure she'd been exploring about 50 yards from the rockslide site. "Quinn, I found something." He hurried to join her, squeezing through the tight opening that widened into a small cave. Hannah stood in the center, staring at something on the ground, a crude cross fashioned from two branches bound together with weathered rope, placed at the head of what was unmistakably a shallow grave. The earth had been disturbed and roughly repacked, now hardened by time but still visible as different from the surrounding soil. "Oh, Nathan," Hannah whispered, sinking to her knees beside the grave. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out to touch the simple cross. "Is this truly where you rest?" Quinn knelt beside her, his arm going around her shoulders as she began to sob in earnest, the grief she had held at bay through determination and hope finally breaking free. He held her as she wept, offering the only comfort he could, his presence and silent understanding of her loss. When her tears finally subsided, Hannah wiped her eyes and looked up at Quinn with renewed resolve. "We need to take him home." "I can't leave him here." Quinn nodded, understanding her need for proper closure. "We will, but not now. It's too dangerous with Taylor's men likely in pursuit. We need to get to Denver with the evidence first. Then we'll return with the marshal and proper authority to claim him." Hannah seemed about to protest, then nodded reluctantly. "You're right, Nathan would want justice first." She reached into her pocket and withdrew the wooden heart which Quinn had returned to her earlier. Opening it carefully, she removed the folded paper inside. "We should look at what Nathan thought was important enough to die for." Quinn took the paper and carefully unfolded it. Inside were meticulous notes in a small, neat hand, dates, names, numbers of cattle, and descriptions of altered brands. Most significantly, there was a detailed account of Taylor's scheme to claim land from smaller ranchers by manipulating water rights and using forged documents. "This is damning evidence," Quinn said, scanning the document. Nathan documented everything, names of conspirators, including Sheriff Mills and Judge Wilson, specific fraudulent transactions, even the location of falsified deeds in Taylor's safe. "He was always thorough," Hannah said softly, pride mingling with sorrow in her voice. "Even as a boy, when he set his mind to something, he saw it through completely." Quinn carefully refolded the paper and returned it to the wooden heart which Hannah secured in her pocket. "We should go," he said gently. "It's not safe to linger." As they prepared to leave the grave site, Hannah knelt once more beside the crude cross. "I'll come back for you, Nathan," she promised quietly. "You won't remain in this lonely place forever." Quinn waited respectfully until she rose and turned to him, her face tear-streaked but composed. As they made their way back to where they'd left the horses, a distant sound froze them both in their tracks, the unmistakable echo of hoofbeats entering the canyon. "Taylor's men," Quinn said grimly, helping Hannah quickly into her saddle. "They've found our trail." "Is there another way out of the canyon?" Hannah asked, glancing anxiously toward the sound of approaching riders. Quinn shook his head. "Not on horseback. Our only advantage is knowing the location of the rockslide. We can get past it faster than they can if they haven't been here before." They spurred their horses forward, moving as quickly as they dared through the obstacle-strewn passage. The sounds of pursuit grew louder behind them, at least 3 or 4 riders, Quinn estimated, and moving with the confidence of men who knew their quarry was trapped ahead. As they navigated around the rockslide debris, Quinn made a quick decision. "There's a fork about a quarter-mile ahead. The main passage continues north, but there's a smaller branch that heads east toward the high country. It's steeper and more treacherous, but it might give us the advantage of surprise." Hannah nodded, trusting his judgment. "Lead the way." They pushed their tired horses harder, the animals responding valiantly despite the difficult terrain. Just as Quinn had remembered, the canyon soon split, the wider northern passage continuing around a bend, the eastern branch narrowing immediately as it began to climb. "This way," Quinn directed, guiding his horse into the eastern branch. The path grew steeper almost immediately, forcing them to slow their pace. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit continued, but their hunters hadn't yet reached the fork. "If we're lucky, they'll assume we continued north and waste time before realizing their mistake," Quinn explained as they climbed. This path eventually connects with an old hunting trail that can take us toward Denver by a different route than the main road. The gamble paid off. As they ascended the difficult path, the sounds of their pursuers faded, suggesting the men had indeed taken the northern branch of the canyon. Quinn and Hannah pushed on, their horses laboring up the increasingly steep incline until they finally emerged onto a high plateau. The vast Colorado landscape spread before them like a living map. "We'll rest the horses briefly," Quinn decided, noting their exhaustion. "Then continue east. We need to put as much distance between us and Taylor's men as possible before nightfall." As they dismounted in the shelter of a stand of pines, Hannah removed the wooden heart from her pocket, holding it thoughtfully. "Nathan carved this the day before he left for the West. He said as long as I had his heart, a piece of him would always be with me." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never imagined it would be all I had left of him." Quinn moved to her side, gently taking her hand with the carved heart in his. "It's more than just a keepsake now, Hannah. It's the key to bringing Taylor and his men to justice for what they did to your brother." Hannah looked up at him, grief and determination mingling in her green eyes. "I've lost Nathan forever. But I won't let his death be meaningless. He died trying to expose Taylor's crimes. We'll finish what he started." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection born of shared purpose and growing trust. Quinn found himself drawing Hannah gently into his arms, offering comfort that felt as necessary to him as it might be to her. She leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his chest as she allowed herself this brief moment of solace. When they finally separated, Quinn saw something new in Hannah's expression, a softness that complemented her determination, a warmth directed specifically at him. It stirred feelings he had long suppressed, opening possibilities he had convinced himself were closed to a man of his solitary nature. "We should continue," he said softly, reluctant to break the moment but aware of the dangers still facing them. Hannah nodded, tucking the wooden heart securely away before mounting her horse. As they set off across the plateau toward Denver, Quinn found his thoughts divided between the immediate concerns of their journey and the unexpected emotions awakening within him. The frontier had always represented freedom to Quinn, freedom from the painful past, from emotional entanglements, from anything that might make him vulnerable. Yet now, riding beside Hannah Keller toward an uncertain future, he began to wonder if true freedom might actually lie in allowing himself to care, to connect, to risk his heart in ways he had avoided for so long. The wooden heart Hannah carried had led them to painful truth, but perhaps it might also lead to something neither of them had been searching for, a chance to heal, to build anew, to find in each other what the harsh frontier so often denied. A place to belong. Denver sprawled before them, a bustling frontier city of brick buildings, boardwalks, and activity that contrasted sharply with the quiet wilderness they had traversed for the past 2 days. Quinn and Hannah approached the outskirts as evening fell on their third day of travel, weary but relieved to have reached their destination without further sign of pursuit. "The federal marshal's office should be near the courthouse," Quinn said as they rode down a broad avenue lined with gas lamps being lit for the evening. "We'll go there first thing in the morning. For now we need food and rest." He guided them to a modest hotel several blocks from the main street, less conspicuous than the grander establishments but still respectable enough for Hannah's comfort. After securing adjoining rooms and seeing to their horses, they met in the hotel's small dining room for their first proper meal in days. Hannah looked exhausted but somehow more at peace than Quinn had yet seen her. "I feel as though we've accomplished something important," she said quietly as they ate. "Nathan can rest easier now, knowing we're carrying his work forward." Quinn nodded, understanding her need to find meaning in her brother's death. "Taylor and his accomplices will face justice. The evidence Nathan gathered is too detailed to dismiss." "What happens after?" Hannah asked, her gaze meeting his across the table. "After we've given the evidence to the marshal and seen to Nathan's proper burial?" The question caught Quinn off guard, though he had been pondering the same uncertainty. His life had been upended the moment he'd spotted Hannah's wagon by Cottonwood Creek, the carefully constructed isolation he had maintained for years crumbling in the face of her quiet determination and genuine need. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "I suppose I'll need to return to the Bar M Ranch, explain my absence to Mr. Mitchell." Of course, Hannah said, something like disappointment flickering briefly in her eyes. You have responsibilities there. Quinn studied her face, realizing with sudden clarity that he was reluctant to imagine a future that didn't include Hannah Keller. In the space of less than a week, she had somehow become important to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. What about you? He asked. Will you return to Pennsylvania? Hannah was silent for a moment, considering. I have nothing waiting for me there. The house is gone, my parents are gone, and now Nathan, she faltered, then continued more firmly. Perhaps I'll stay in Colorado. Timber Creek seemed like a nice town despite our experiences there, or perhaps Denver. I have some education, I could seek employment as a schoolteacher. The thought of Hannah returning alone to Timber Creek, where Taylor still held influence, sent a chill through Quinn. Yet the alternative, her settling in Denver while he returned to the remote Bar M Ranch, seemed equally unacceptable. Before he could respond, a man's voice interrupted their conversation. Excuse me, did I hear you mention Timber Creek? Quinn turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man in a well-worn suit standing beside their table. His weathered face and alert eyes suggested both authority and frontier experience. Who's asking? Quinn replied cautiously, his hand instinctively moving toward his revolver. The man noticed the movement and held up his hand slightly. No cause for alarm. Marshal Daniel Blackwood, Federal District Court. He produced a badge from his pocket as identification. I couldn't help overhearing. Timber Creek has been of particular interest to my office recently. Quinn and Hannah exchanged glances, surprise and hope mingling in their expressions. Perhaps you'd better join us, Marshal, Quinn suggested, gesturing to an empty chair. As Blackwood seated himself, Hannah withdrew the wooden heart from her pocket. I believe we have something that might be of great interest to you, she said, carefully opening the carving to extract the folded paper within. The Marshal's eyebrows rose as he accepted and unfolded the document. His expression grew increasingly serious as he scanned the meticulous notes. Where did you get this? He asked, looking up with keen interest. Hannah's voice was steady as she replied. It was compiled by my brother, Nathan Keller, who was killed for his efforts to expose Thomas Taylor's criminal activities. Over the next hour, they related the entire story, Nathan's journey west, his undercover work gathering evidence, his disappearance and presumed death, and their own dangerous journey to discover the truth and bring the evidence to Denver. Marshal Blackwood listened without interruption, his expression grim but not surprised. When they finished, he carefully refolded the document and handed it back to Hannah. Miss Keller, Mr. Hawkins, you've unwittingly stumbled into an investigation that's been ongoing for nearly 2 years, he explained. Your brother was indeed working with our office, though not officially as a deputy. He approached us shortly after taking employment at the Circle T, having witnessed suspicious activities he believed were illegal. You knew about Nathan? Hannah asked, hope and pain mingling in her voice. You knew he was in danger. Blackwood's expression softened with regret. We knew he was gathering evidence, yes, but communication was necessarily limited for his safety. When he stopped reporting in November, we feared the worst but had no proof of foul play. Without evidence or a body, we couldn't move against Taylor. We found both, Quinn said grimly. Nathan's grave in Eagle Canyon and the evidence he died protecting. The Marshal nodded solemnly. This changes everything. With this document and your testimony, we can finally bring Taylor and his accomplices to justice. He leaned forward earnestly. But I won't mislead you, it will be dangerous. Taylor has powerful friends, not just in Timber Creek but in Denver as well. Until we make arrests, you'd both be at risk. We've already risked everything to get here, Hannah replied with quiet determination. I won't turn back now. Quinn reached across the table to cover her hand with his. Neither will I. Something in the simple gesture, the natural way Quinn offered support and Hannah accepted it, caught the Marshal's attention. His expression softened momentarily before returning to professional focus. Then here's what we'll do, Blackwood outlined. You'll both remain here under federal protection while I assemble a proper force. Within 3 days, we'll ride for Timber Creek with sufficient men to arrest Taylor and his accomplices. We'll also recover your brother's remains, Miss Keller, for proper burial. The plan was sensible and thorough, offering the justice they sought while minimizing additional risk. Yet as they finished their discussion and the marshal departed to begin preparations, Quinn found himself contemplating what would come after, the question Hannah had raised earlier that remained unanswered. They walked together to their rooms in comfortable silence, both processing the unexpected development that had accelerated their quest for justice. At Hannah's door, they paused, reluctant to part despite their exhaustion. "It seems almost unreal," Hannah said softly, "after months of uncertainty, to find answers and the means to justice so quickly." "Nathan laid the groundwork," Quinn reminded her gently. "His courage made this possible." Hannah nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I wish I could tell him that his efforts weren't in vain, that he succeeded, even though he didn't live to see it." "I think he knows," Quinn said, surprising himself with the sentiment. He had never been one for spiritual beliefs, yet something about Hannah's faith in her brother moved him to offer comfort beyond mere practicality. Hannah smiled gratefully, then hesitated, seeming to struggle with something she wanted to say. "Quinn, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You put aside your own life, your responsibilities, to help a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore, Hannah," Quinn replied, the simple truth of the statement resonating deeply between them. She met his gaze, vulnerability, and something warmer in her expression. "What happens after this is finished? Will you return to your life as if none of this happened?" The question cut to the heart of what Quinn had been avoiding confronting, the realization that he no longer wanted to return to his solitary existence. In helping Hannah find her brother, he had inadvertently found something he hadn't known he was missing: connection, purpose beyond mere survival, and feelings he had long denied himself. "I don't think I can," he admitted quietly. "Or perhaps more accurately, I don't want to." Hope brightened Hannah's tired eyes. "What do you want, Quinn?" The question hung between them, laden with possibility. Quinn had spent years avoiding such moments, moments of truth that required emotional vulnerability. Yet now, standing before this remarkable woman who had shown such courage and determination, he found the words coming more easily than he would have imagined possible. "I want to see what might be possible between us, Hannah," he said simply. "When I found you at Cottonwood Creek, I thought I was merely helping a woman in distress. I didn't realize I was finding someone who would change how I see the world and myself." Hannah's breath caught audibly, her eyes widening at his candor. "I felt so alone when I came west," she confessed. "Even finding Nathan was only part of what I was searching for. I needed to belong somewhere to someone after losing everything." "And now," Quinn asked softly, a smile of quiet certainty transformed her face. "Now I know that home isn't a place, it's where you feel understood and accepted completely. It's where your heart is safe." Her hand moved to touch the wooden carving in her pocket. "Nathan knew that when he gave me this. He was trying to tell me that hearts can find their way home, even across great distances." Quinn gently took her free hand in his. "Hannah Keller, when this is finished, when justice is done and your brother is properly laid to rest, would you consider making a new beginning with me?" The question was both vague and profound, not quite a proposal yet more than a casual invitation. It acknowledged that their connection, while swift, contained the potential for something lasting. Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered, "I would consider that the greatest blessing to come from all this sorrow." Quinn leaned forward slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. Instead, Hannah met him halfway, their lips meeting in a gentle kiss that held more promise than passion, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they parted, Quinn touched her cheek tenderly. "Rest now. Tomorrow we continue Nathan's fight." Hannah nodded, reluctantly stepping back toward her door. "Good night, Quinn." "Good night, Hannah." As Quinn entered his own room moments later, he found himself contemplating how completely his life had changed in less than a week. The careful emotional distance he had maintained for years, his belief that the frontier was no place for attachment or vulnerability, had been thoroughly upended by a woman searching for her brother and a small carved wooden heart. For the first time in his adult life, Quinn Hawkins allowed himself to imagine a future that included genuine connection, a shared life built on mutual understanding and affection rather than mere practicality and survival. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating, like stepping into unknown territory without a map. Yet as he prepared for sleep, Quinn found himself strangely at peace with the uncertainty. Whatever the future held, he would no longer face it alone, and that knowledge made all the difference. 3 months later, spring sunshine warmed the small cemetery on the outskirts of Timber Creek. The newly placed headstone gleamed in the light, its inscription simple but dignified: Nathan James Keller, 1853-1878, beloved brother, courageous soul. Hannah stood before it, a bunch of wildflowers in her hand, the same varieties etched into the wooden heart she still carried. Quinn waited respectfully a few paces behind, giving her a moment of private farewell. Much had changed in the months since they had first ridden to the federal marshal's office in Denver. Thomas Taylor and his primary accomplices now awaited trial in the territorial prison, their arrests having sent shockwaves through the county. Sheriff Mills had attempted to flee but was captured crossing into Wyoming territory. The evidence Nathan had gathered, combined with Hannah and Quinn's testimony, had proven irrefutable. The recovery of Nathan's remains from Eagle Canyon had been a solemn occasion, but it had provided Hannah with the closure she needed. Now, with a proper Christian burial completed and justice for her brother in progress, she seemed ready to look toward the future. Quinn watched as Hannah knelt to place the flowers at the base of the headstone, her lips moving in a quiet prayer or final words to her brother. The past months had deepened his admiration for her strength and gentle determination. What had begun as an impulsive decision to help a woman in distress had evolved into the most significant relationship of his life. When Hannah finally rose and turned toward him, her eyes were damp but peaceful. "Thank you for being here," she said, joining him and naturally taking his offered arm. "It means everything to have you with me." "Always," Quinn replied simply. They walked together through the cemetery toward the waiting buggy. The town of Timber Creek spread before them, looking remarkably unchanged despite the upheaval in its power structure. The Circle T Ranch had been placed under court administration pending the outcome of Taylor's trial, with honest management installed to oversee operations. "The last of Nathan's affairs are settled now," Hannah said as Quinn helped her into the buggy. "Mr. Blackwood says the government compensation for his service should arrive within the month." Quinn nodded as he settled beside her and took up the reins. Marshal Blackwood had been instrumental in ensuring Nathan's sacrifice was officially recognized, arranging for a modest but significant payment to Hannah as his next of kin. "Have you decided what you'll do with it?" Quinn asked, guiding the horses toward town. Hannah's expression grew thoughtful. "I've been considering purchasing that small parcel of land we looked at, the one with the creek running through it about 5 miles outside town." Quinn's interest quickened. They had ridden past the property several times during their stays in Timber Creek, 20 acres of good land with a sturdy cabin, meadow for grazing, and a clear creek providing year-round water. It was modestly priced due to the owner's eagerness to return east. "It's good land," he agreed casually, though his heart rate had accelerated. "More than enough for a garden, some livestock. The cabin would need some work, but it's solidly built." Hannah glanced at him sideways, a smile playing at her lips. "I thought perhaps it might make a good start for a future. Though I'd need someone knowledgeable about ranching to help me make proper use of it." The tentative invitation in her words was unmistakable. Quinn guided the buggy to the side of the road, bringing it to a stop beneath the shade of a large cottonwood tree. He turned to face Hannah directly, taking her hands in his. "Hannah Keller, are you asking me to help you build a home?" he asked, his voice gentle but serious. Color rose in her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "I'm asking for more than that, Quinn Hawkins, and you know it." Quinn's heart swelled with emotions he had once believed himself incapable of feeling. The woman before him, brave, compassionate, resilient, had transformed his understanding of what was possible on the frontier. Not mere survival, but a life of genuine connection and shared purpose. "I've been carrying something with me," he said, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small object wrapped in soft leather. Waiting for the right moment. Hannah watched curiously as he unwrapped the bundle to reveal a wooden carving, a heart similar in size to the one Nathan had made, but with different details. Where Nathan's carving featured wildflowers, Quinn's depicted aspen leaves and a small cabin beside a creek. "I'm not as skilled as your brother was," Quinn said almost shyly. "But I wanted to make something that might represent what we could build together." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes as she accepted the carving, tracing its details with gentle fingers. "It's beautiful, Quinn." "Truly." "There's something inside," he prompted softly. Following the same hidden seam design as Nathan's heart, Hannah carefully separated the two halves. Inside lay a simple gold ring. Quinn took her hand gently in his. "I've spent most of my life believing the frontier was no place for love, that survival meant staying detached, keeping to myself. You proved me wrong, Hannah. You showed me that real strength comes from connection, not isolation." Hannah's tears flowed freely now, though her smile was radiant. "Quinn, I love you," he continued, the words no longer difficult to say. "And if you'll have me, I want to build that life you mentioned, a home, a future together." "Yes," Hannah whispered, her free hand clutching the carved heart while the other remained in Quinn's grasp. "With all my heart, yes." When they kissed beneath the cottonwood tree, it felt to Quinn like the culmination of a journey that had begun the moment he spotted a lone wagon beside Cottonwood Creek. Every choice since then, to help Hannah, to protect her, to join her quest for truth, had led to this moment of profound certainty. As they continued their drive back to town, plans for their future flowing easily between them, Quinn reflected on the small carved heart that had brought them together. Nathan Keller had created it as a symbol of connection across distance, never knowing it would eventually lead his sister to both justice and love. The wooden heart Hannah still carried had indeed found its way home, and in doing so had helped two souls find theirs as well. Autumn painted the Colorado landscape in brilliant gold and crimson as the small wedding party gathered outside the newly renovated cabin. Aspen trees shimmered in the afternoon light, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine and wood smoke. Quinn stood nervously on the porch, dressed in his finest clothes, a new suit purchased specially for the occasion. Beside him, the minister from Timber Creek checked his pocket watch and smiled reassuringly. A small gathering of friends waited in the yard, Mac and several cowboys from the Bar M Ranch, Marshall Blackwood, and a few townspeople from Timber Creek who had supported Hannah during the difficult months of Taylor's trial. When the cabin door opened, conversation ceased. Hannah emerged on the arm of Gerald Porter, the newspaper editor who had become a dear friend and who had offered to give her away in the absence of family. She wore a simple white dress with lace trim, her honey blonde hair arranged with wildflowers that matched those carved into the wooden heart she carried in a small pouch at her waist. Quinn's breath caught at the sight of her, not simply because of her beauty, though she was indeed radiant, but because of all they had endured together to reach this moment. The journey from strangers to partners had been marked by danger and grief, yet had ultimately led to this place of profound joy and promise. As Hannah joined him before the minister, Quinn took her hands in his, marveling at how naturally they fit together. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying across the peaceful homestead, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, the traditional words taking on deeper meaning for two people who had found each other against all odds. When they exchanged vows, Quinn spoke with a confidence that surprised even himself, the hesitation and caution that had characterized so much of his life replaced by absolute certainty. "I, Quinn Hawkins, take you, Hannah Keller, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he promised. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Hannah's voice was clear and unwavering as she repeated the vows, her green eyes never leaving his. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in cheerful applause and congratulations. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful, a feast prepared by friends, music from a fiddle played by one of the ranch hands, and dancing that continued until the stars appeared in the clear mountain sky. Throughout it all, Quinn found himself marveling at how completely his life had transformed in less than a year. As evening deepened and the guests began to depart, Quinn and Hannah stood together on the porch of what was now their home, accepting final congratulations and well wishes. Marshal Blackwood was among the last to leave, pausing to shake Quinn's hand firmly. Taylor's trial begins next month in Denver, he reminded them. Your testimonies have been recorded, so you won't need to appear in person unless something unexpected arises. Thank you for arranging that, Hannah said warmly. And for everything else you've done for us, for Nathan. Blackwood nodded solemnly. Your brother was a brave man, Mrs. Hawkins. His work helped bring down one of the territory's most dangerous criminal operations. That land grant the government provided is small recompense for his sacrifice. The 40 additional acres adjoining their original purchase had arrived unexpectedly 2 months earlier, an official recognition of Nathan's service that had enabled Quinn and Hannah to establish a small but viable cattle operation of their own. We'll honor his memory by making good use of it, Quinn promised, his arm around Hannah's waist. After the marshal departed, Quinn and Hannah remained on the porch, watching as the last wagon disappeared down the lane that led to the main road. The evening was peaceful, the only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the gentle rustle of aspen leaves in the breeze. Happy? Quinn asked softly, turning to his new wife. Hannah's smile was answer enough, but she spoke nonetheless. More than I ever imagined possible after losing so much. She reached into the small pouch at her waist and withdrew the wooden heart her brother had carved. I visited Nathan's grave yesterday. I told him about today, about us. I think he would be pleased. Quinn nodded, remembering the brave young man he had never met but whose legacy had changed his life so profoundly. I believe he would. Hannah opened the carved heart, now empty of the evidence it had once contained, but no less meaningful. I've been thinking about this, she said thoughtfully, about what it represents. Your connection to Nathan, Quinn suggested. Yes, but more than that, Hannah traced the carved wildflowers with her fingertip. It represents faith in finding one's way home, even across impossible distances. Nathan believed that when he gave it to me, though he couldn't have known the journey it would lead me on. Quinn thought about the matching heart he had carved, now containing Hannah's wedding ring, until he placed it on her finger during their ceremony. Or who you would find along the way. Hannah smiled up at him. The heart finds its way home, just as Nathan said, mine found its way to you. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Quinn drew Hannah into his arms, overwhelmed by gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. What had begun with a chance encounter beside Cottonwood Creek, a trail boss and a solitary young woman with a carved wooden heart, had transformed into a love that promised to withstand whatever challenges the frontier might present. Together they entered their home, closing the door on the peaceful Colorado evening and beginning the life they had fought so hard to build. The wooden hearts, one carved by a brother who had sacrificed everything for justice, the other by a man who had discovered his capacity for love when he least expected it, would remain treasured symbols of their journey. And in the years to come, as their family grew and their ranch prospered, Quinn and Hannah would often reflect on how a small carved heart had led them to each other, and to a happiness that neither had believed possible on the wild frontier that had finally become their home.